We're still doing the record the sessions to see if it improves productivity thing. Seems to help a little bit. Did some work the other day without recording it, and I don't know, just a kind of thought that I might seem to make things move a little smoother. I have finally finished this PowerPoint. It's supposed to last 2 hours. Long time to talk. I'm about to try to just give it and see what my timing kind of turns out for it. That's a. I don't really like that. Tools, slideshow. There we go. Alrighty. Let's see what we get here. Alright, so Dan Griffin going to be talking about board prep. So kind of some plans to cover, stuff to cover. I'll talk about some background info, mental mindset, know your foe. So just kind of like knowing the test itself. Some test taking tips or learning strategies, some test taking tips, and then some examples. So why is this random dude talking to us? That's me. Probably the number one reason is I know your program director, Dr. Morris. We did some residency together. Second reason I'm probably here is I've done well on a few board exams in the past. Just mild disclaimers kind of to all that, and just so you know a little bit about my backstory, so that it doesn't seem like I'm just the random guy that does really good at test. I spent a little time, at least early on, we're talking about like grade school, and some like special reading courses because I couldn't read real well. Almost got held back a time or two. Finally kind of got through that, did okay. Got into high school. I always had a pretty good GPA. I felt like I put in a good bit of effort, but had good GPA. I took the ACT. I made an 18 and a 21 the 2 times I took it. Those are both less than 50th percentile, i.e. did not do well. I would theoretically have passed, but I didn't crush it by any means. Got into college, went through college. Again, pretty good GPA because I felt like I studied hard, and studied a lot. As one of my friends told me when I got into med school, it wasn't possible to study any more than I was currently studying. So got into med school, took the MCAT, or was trying to go into med school, took the MCAT, made a 25. A 25 is less than the 50th percentile again. So at this point in time in my life, I was at least not feeling as though I was a good test taker. I felt like there were people that were good at taking tests and people that were not good at taking tests, and that doing well in school was not per se directly related to test taking skills or those type things. So I identified myself as probably a poor test taker. And then went from there. I got into med school. Kind of ended up running into a crossroads where I had to decide whether or not I wanted to continue to be a poor test taker, or to try to do really well in exams. And at least at this point in time in my life, I kind of felt that time, effort, elbow grease, you could change whatever you wanted to change. So I ended up kind of setting out just to prove to myself that I could be good at exams. Someone that was, and from my own personal perspective, not good at exams, could become good at exams just from, trying to learn the trade is essentially what I tried to do. I studied a good bit and real hard for the USMLE/Comlex level 1, and I think I did quite well. I made greater than 600 on the Comlex, like a 240 something, 246 I believe on the USMLE. So that was a substantial improvement from kind of 50th percentile is where I had been hitting on previous standardized exams. To now both those scores were greater than the 84th percentile or greater than a standard deviation above the mean. I then said, well, I did well, but that wasn't what I was exactly shooting for. Because I remember I wanted to blow the top off of it. I wanted to, get in the 95th plus percentile kind of range. So I studied again for about a year and a couple months for step two. Again, very hard. This and a lot of the things I learned were during this like year and a couple months. Kind of about strategy, test taking, those type things. Ended up scoring greater than 800 on the Comlex this go around and a 270 on the USMLE. This kind of directly fed into Comlex Level 3 where I scored greater than a 900. Then we had internal medicine and, now I'm going to fast forward a lot, but for my IM boards, my pulmonary boards, and my critical care boards, I'm a pulmonary critical care doc. I scored, the top score, an 800 on every one of those tests. And I kind of feel like I've achieved the end goal that I was aiming at. And it legitimately, I started aiming at about 10 years ago. So, which I think is kind of cool. So, I think that's the main reason I'm here. Not because I'm some gifted test taker. I think I've become good at it. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think I'm pretty good at it now. But it wasn't something I was innately born with. It wasn't something that just came natural. This legitimately came through tons and tons of effort. And if I remember at one point in time I counted up how many questions I worked. So what was when I took pulmonary boards, I had worked somewhere around 40,000 questions is what I had counted up. That's a lot of questions. So anyway, moral of story. You work a lot of questions and try real hard. You can do whatever you want to. It's kind of the thing. So, but neither here nor there. So let's kind of move on. Next thing we'll talk about mental mindset. So, and I mentioned this a little bit. So, does anyone here identify as a bad test taker? And I'm sure some of you do. The thing I want to at least stress here is the word identity. Mentally, when we identify with something, we will fight to keep that identity. And if you identify yourself as a bad test taker, you're going to fight to keep that identity and basically create this self-fulfilling prophecy of you being a sucky, crappy test taker just because that's what you kind of believe you are. So my statement to that is don't believe you're a bad test taker and stop it. Just stop believing that. Stop feeding yourself that lie and, try to change how you look at things. And that's where we kind of get into this. Instead of a fixed mindset is basically the I am X and it cannot be changed. So I am a bad test taker and I cannot change that versus a growth mindset, which is more of, everything's kind of a building block to the next thing and I can improve with time and effort. So you can read through here, finds lessons and inspiration through the success of others, feels threatened by the success of others, learns from criticism, ignores negative feedback, effort is a path to mastery, effort is fruitless as it doesn't do anything, gives up easily, persists through setbacks, anyway, yada, yada, yada. One's better than the other. Have a growth mindset. If you're looking through everything as I can get better through this thing as opposed to I am a poor test taker and therefore I will never get better, then you're going to be stuck. You're destining yourself to be stuck with a fixed mindset. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That also brings us to this like achievement equation, which again this is not perfect, guys. This is just meant to show you that you got talent and you got effort and then you have skill, and you have skill and you have effort and you have achievement, and that effort is the thing that is there twice. So if you put in a crap ton of effort, you can, basically be just as good, better at most things than most people. Now, granted, there are things that, you just might not ever get there, even with all the effort in the world, because you aren't 6'8" and you can't jump out the gym. So, you're probably not going to be the best basketball player ever, even though you might legitimately sell your soul to the devil to be good at basketball, i.e. put in all the effort in the world. So there are limits, yes, and there are people that are more talented than others, and there's people that are smarter than others. But what I'm getting at is just for the thing that we're doing here, which is taking an exam that's to test, some version of competency in medicine. The achievement, which is a good test score. Again, should you even be aiming at that? I don't even know. You should just be aiming at trying to be a good doctor, and if that means that does mean knowing a bunch of stuff, but anyway, that can definitely be attained just through effort. If you can read, if you can write, and you've got an IQ that's around average, I think you can do very, very well on these exams. So first thing that we want to get to is, and I've given some resources here because some of this stuff is a little woo woo. So first thing is just change your mindset. You want to be excited, not nervous, anxious, dreading anything negative. That's kind of how you want to look at this thing. You want to be excited about it. Excited about this test, excited about preparing for it, and you want to at least convince yourself that you're something positive for this test, this experience, versus something negative. Because if you're negative and you begin to dread it and feel anxious and nervous, you're not going to want to push through it. You're not going to want to continue to try. It's gonna be hard. And why are you excited? Because you want to perform. You want to crush it. You want to show what you know. You want to, like I said, kick its ass. You want to own the bastard. Whatever you want to say there. You want to do the positive thing of that. Kind of turn it into your enemy, as opposed to this thing that you cower to. This is kind of negativity. You just can't have it. You can't be negative. You can't be beating up on yourself all the time. And this is not like the casual negativity of you missed something that you should have got. And you're like, I'm so stupid. I should have gotten that right. It's not that. It's that deep-seated negativity where you're internally beating up on yourself and telling yourself that you can't do this and woe is me. That kind of mindset. Y'all all know what I'm talking about because you've either seen it or you've experienced it, because you're humans and we all have those and experience those emotions. So that thing that I'm talking about, that deep-seated angst, negativity, badness, tearing down, beating yourself up, you just can't have it. It's not worth anything. It doesn't make you any better at anything, and it's definitely not going to make you better at this exam. And again, you're not trying to create the self-fulfilling prophecy of you sucking at this. You want to create the self-fulfilling prophecy of you crushing this thing. So you gotta shift the mindset a little bit. Anxiety. This is a little bit busier side. So number one, it's natural. You should have some anxiety. If you weren't anxious, it would be odd. It would be odd to not have some anxiety related to this test. Anything that you care about in life, you're going to get a little bit anxious. That's normal. And a little bit can motivate you. There's actually some pretty good studies out there that say, baseline anxiety about something kind of promotes movement, promotes progressing towards something. But you can get so anxious that you can't get out of bed, open a book, or work a question, and that's when it's bad. If that's the level of anxiety you're working with, you gotta do something to get through that, and you need to find a way to deal with it. So here's some tips on how to handle it. Number one, power posing. This one's really easy. Boost internal levels of basically positive feeling hormones, which end up being testosterone, oddly, but also dopamine and a few other good things. Pretty good TED Talk on it if you were to want to listen to it. Talk to somebody. It can be anybody. It can be your dog. It can be your mom. It can be your brother. Whoever you want to talk to. Just talk to someone. Just kind of unloading the burden of the anxiety onto someone else. Study a lot. The more you know, the less anxious you're going to be. If you really feel like you're going to crush this thing because you know everything that they can ask you, you're likely going to be less anxious than if you feel like, oh my goodness, I haven't studied at all, and let's just hope I pass. So you get what I'm saying there. And then you want to set up that scenario and rehearse. This means to try to make it as routine as possible, as familiar as possible. That's why all these question banks and test banks, if you notice, they have a mode that looks like the exam. It's to get you familiar with the view of the test, to make it as routine and as familiar as possible. Sometimes that might even mean, if you're someone that has, super, super bad, pre-test anxiety, maybe you go to the test center and you make them walk you through the, getting checked in portion and making sure you have everything you need, and you let them, you can do the tutorial there in the testing center. Where you go through the tutorial with them, kind of proctoring you so that you can at least see how the scenario is set up. But, usually by this point in time that you're here and we're having this talk, all of your residents. You've all done this a time or two. This is not your first rodeo. So try to practice the test under actual conditions. This means if you're going to take a practice test and you were, again, trying to help it to improve your anxiety, if your test was at 8, on a weekend day that you could take a practice test and you had 4 hours to block out for it, you would wake up at 6, you would do your pre-test ready stuff, and you would sit down at 8 and you would start your practice test and you would take your breaks and you would finish your practice test by noon or whatever it was, just as though you were going to take a real practice test. Other thing is get some sleep and exercise. Sleep's a killer one here, especially if you're just having an anxious day or a down and out day. Getting extra sleep can really help with that. Exercise, helps just kind of boost overall mood with time. We're going to talk a little bit more about sleep and exercise throughout this whole thing. Find some ways to de-stress. If that's hang out with friends, if that's, again, exercise, if that's sleep good, if that's how you eat, if that's cook with friends, if that's hang out with family, and whatever it is, find some ways to manage your stress. You can meditate. Meditate's a good way to also curb anxiety. Some pretty good studies out there on that. Personally, not a big meditator. Tried it a time or two. Seemed a little woo-woo to me again. But, it works. There's some good info out there that say it really does work. So, if it works for you, don't do it. Don't just let my closed-mindedness turn you off. Eat breakfast and don't just eat sugar. This is kind of before the test itself. We'll talk a little bit about the sugar thing. So sugar kind of raises cortisol levels and stress hormone levels, especially if you eat gobs of it. Also worsens our ability to recall information as well as remember information. So you don't want to eat a lot of sugar right before your test. You don't want to go in there and just pound 900 calories of I don't know, what are those things? Skittles. Before you sit down for your exam. This is kind of where they say, some fat, some protein, those type of things seem to be a little bit better at, keeping you from being hungry, those type of stuff. Caffeine and stimulants, they may not be your friend, especially if you're an anxious person. If you're someone that doesn't take a lot of caffeine and you're anxious as they get, and then you go in there 10 minutes before your exam, you pound 300 milligrams of some kind of stimulant, energy drink, because you want to be jacked up for this test. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to end up shitting yourself about halfway through the first block, and you're going to have to pee a lot. So, that's not good. You're going to be running in your chair, which is going to annoy all the little people around you, because you'll sit there and be bouncing your feet, and they can all feel the desk and the computers wiggle and all that kind of fun stuff. Getting into the other stuff is, maybe you can pay someone to listen. This is where you actually go to like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I think it's psychologist. And they legitimately just listen to you and you tell them your concerns, and hopefully they can provide you with some feedback to help kind of curb your anxiety. And then, seek some professional help. That's a big one. If your anxiety / depression or whatever it is pathologic to the point that it is causing true problems in your life, you probably should seek some professional help. And talking to someone and power posing and studying more might not cut it. And same goes for exercise and sleep. I think if you do the first bunch of these, I don't know how many we got here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. If you do the first 10 things and you're still anxious as a Nelly and depressed and can't do what you need to do to get this thing done, then you probably need to pay somebody to listen, and you probably need to seek some professional help, because you're burning through all your other resources. Generally speaking, we jump straight to this one, and that's why we all have jobs, and we don't do the things that actually always help, which are you eat right, you exercise, and you sleep good, and generally speaking, you are better off at everything. So next up, know your phone. So this is the test itself. So first thing you want to do is schedule the test. I know that seems dumb, but sometimes people don't study it. Schedule it. Maybe look at the tutorial, especially if you're unfamiliar with it. And it's going to take you about 3 months to get your test results. The blueprint, you want to look at the blueprint, and you want to know what you need to know about it. So pretty big things here. Cardiovascular system, 14%. Critical care medicine, 10%. And that's the cross-content area. But the big one you want to look at is this one, this medical content area. After the heart stuff, which is 14, you got GI, which is 9, infectious disease, which is 9, and then you got pulm and rheum orthopedics, which are 9. So those are kind of the big, endocrine's 9. I missed an endocrine up here. Those are the big things you need to really focus on. So that means if you were to have to say I am going to study X over Y, remember you'd want to study endocrine, diabetes, and metabolism over ophthalmology and ENT stuff. That would just be a better use of your time. So, where to focus? Again, these are kind of the big hitters. Cardiovascular stuff, endocrine, diabetes, GI, pulm, rheum and orthopedics, and infectious disease. You also want to focus on geriatric medicine and critical care. The geriatric stuff's kind of spread out through all of it. Same goes for critical care. These are just the things, what to do for old people, physical therapy, and stop taking those meds. And then critical care, these are all the things that could kill you, so therefore they want you to know them. Also, where to focus. So if you look at the blueprint, you look at the whole big long blueprint, what you'll see is most of the things on the blueprint are less than 2% of the exam, right around about there. These are the only 3 things that were greater than 2% of the exam. The first one was hypertension, and hypertension showed up in, I think, endocrine as well as renal, and in like those subsections as well. But hypertension is 5% of the exam. So there's 240 questions. 5% of 240 questions is what? Where's my calculator? I thought it was on this page. There it is. So yeah, 0.05 times 240, 12. There are going to be 12 questions on hypertension. It looks like 6 on common pulmonary symptoms and 6 on obstructive lung disease. And what I'm getting at here is that these are the 3 biggest topic areas of all the subtopics that you should probably try to study, because again, these were the only things that were greater than 2% of the test. Where not to focus. That would be ophthalmology. And what I'm getting at here is, 1% of the exam is, 2.4 questions, something like that. So, and they're probably going to be obvious, that you don't want to waste a ton of time trying to learn this ophthalmology stuff when it might not even show up on the exam. That's number 1. Number 2, and when you've got easy points sitting out there for other stuff. So, again, this is kind of just the breakdown. So first you're going to register, then you're going to have a tutorial, then, the instructions of honesty page, and then your first session. The sessions are 2 hours and you get 60 questions. So if you add it up, there's 240 questions and 8 hours of testing time, or 480 minutes. So that gives you 2 minutes per question. So that's fairly reasonable. That's a good bit more time per question compared to like the COMLEX and the USMLE that you've taken prior to this point. Resources, you got MixApp, you got MedStudy, you got UWorld, you got AnyJM, these board review courses that you can sit at in person, these question banks, the videos, there's audio. My comments here, or my main comment here is, it's not really what you use, it's just using what you have. So you're probably all provided with something, just because that's generally what residencies do. And I would just say whatever it is, just use it. That's probably all you need. So that'd be question 1. Statement 2. If you're going to use lots of different material, my statement is try to saturate yourself with different avenues of learning. That'd be audio, video, questions, reading, and just kind of bombard your senses with it. Listen to lectures on the way in while you're driving, watch videos whenever you can't read or study or work questions anymore, listen to stuff when you work out or you're exercising, so that you're just kind of saturating your system with all different kinds and versions of material, to the point that you've covered the stuff 100 different times, 100 different ways. Even if it was all audio, which is not per se the highest yield when it comes to like retention stuff, it's still better than nothing. The other comment I have is board review courses. So there's been some pretty good studies out there on board review courses and their ability to not improve your board scores, which, you think, oh my goodness, how is that? How do board review courses even make money if they don't improve your board scores? So there's a select few that they seem to help, and it's those at like the very, very bottom of the totem pole, like the folks that are straddling the going to pass, not going to pass line. So what I'm getting at is, I wouldn't personally use your money to go sign up for a week-long in-person board review course. I don't think that's worth your time or your money. If you're going to get a board review course, my suggestion would be like a video board review course, so therefore you could watch it as you have time, so you don't have to sit through these 8-hour droning days of them just beating you over the face with lecture after lecture after lecture, because that's not worth much. What is probably worth the most is just working questions and question banks. And the more questions, the better. The more new questions, the better. Working through a question bank 2 and 3 and 4 times, probably not as beneficial as working 4 different question banks. And that makes some sense, right? You're going to end up memorizing the questions by the time you get to the end of it, especially if you're doing the Mixat bank 4 times. The 4th go around, you should be getting 100% of those right. Like, oh, I always forget them. There's no way I'll remember. That's crap. We all remember them. You'll remember something. You'll remember the picture. You'll remember some weird story. Anyway, moral story. New question banks, new questions is better than reworking old. But if you can't rework, but if you can't get anything new, then sure, rework the old. So, all right. So next is learning strategies. This is going to get a little bit into the weeds, and I do apologize for that, but hopefully it won't go too long. First thing is, most of you are residents, so you are kind of transitioning from the childhood learner, which I believe most folks in med school kind of end up falling into the childhood learning kind of philosophy of things, to the adult learning strategy, which it's called pedagogy, which is kids, and andragogy, which is adults. Adults are more independent, self-directed. Children are more dependent, the way I like to look at it is spoon-fed. So they want everything just kind of given to them and then them to learn it, and then they regurgitate it back to you. As you kind of transition more into adulthood and adult learning style, you become more, you direct more of your learning, i.e., you know what you want to know. You know you don't need to know other things. So you focus on what is truly important, what's going to get you results. And generally in your workplace or your job or yada yada yada. The better approach is the adult approach, especially as you get into residency and you go on and like through fellowship and into practice. Because the further out you get from med school, the less people are going to just hand you information and say, "Oh, here it is, put on this perfect platter for you to learn." And no one has time to do that. Just we don't have time. Everybody's busy. Everybody's working. Everybody's got patients to see. Don't be the douchebag that makes us, spoon feed you any information, or you're not going to learn anything. If you are that person, then guess what? You're not going to get much out of residency. You're going to have to go get it on your own. And if you're not going to get it on your own, then it ain't coming to be getting. So you just got to go get it. And that's, like I said, that's the adult version of this. So 2 different types of memory, just to kind of, again, get into more of the learning strategies. You got episodic and semantic. Episodic is the memory of events. Semantic is the memory of facts. Generally speaking, all initial new experiences are a memory of an event. And then after you rehearse it a million times, it ends up kind of being converted into facts. So like a semantic memory would be 2 + 2 = 4. That's a fact. But the first time I ever saw that, which was sometime a million years ago when I was a kid, not a million years ago, but you get what I'm saying. That first time was an episodic memory. So the first time it came in as episodic, and then after lots of rinsing and repeating, it became a semantic memory. So the memory process has encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. Encoding is just the process of learning process or event. So it's the learning process. So the act of it getting interpreted by your brain. So this lecture, right now you're all encoding the information that I'm telling to you. Consolidation is converting the new memory into long-term storage, which that happens with time, and basically by itself. You don't have to do anything for it. Meaning, if I were to give this lecture today, this would all be encoding. It's all new. And I were to come back and give it again tomorrow, you would have consolidated some of that information. So some of this would seem old hat. And if I gave you it again in a week, there would be more of it that was consolidated. More of it would seem old hat. And then the retrieval process is the recalling of the memory. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the encoding, again, process of just basically learning the event has some things that you need to know. Good health, good mental state seem to improve this. And again, this kind of even goes back to our first kind of the mental mindset stuff. If you're sick, it's hard to learn. If you're not eating right, not sleeping well, not exercising, it's hard to learn. If you're not motivated, it's hard to learn. Like if you stuck me in a lecture where I had to learn how to put together a car, I would probably tune out and not be there. Even though that's kind of interesting, I don't do anything with cars on a daily basis. So therefore, why would I need to learn how to put an engine together when I can barely slash can't even change my oil in my car? So if I can't change my oil, telling me how to build an engine is worth nothing to me. So I don't have much motivation there. Anyway, I think you get what I'm saying. So event factors, is this personally important? Is it novel? Is there an interesting storyline? Is there strong emotions? One way to engender strong emotions for me is to, if there ever was a complication to a procedure or to an event or to a medication, and I'm trying to remember it, and I don't want it to happen again, if I'm ever telling the story to someone else, I tell them that they died, even though it may have not happened. So, like, one time we gave X, Y, or Z, didn't really realize that it could cause, this, and this, and they died. So I have made it strongly emotional because I caused someone to die in my story, even though, again, it might not be true. But that makes it very memorable for myself as well as for the person that had to, listen to my story. And then your different studying techniques can also improve your encoding. This is like the recall of the material, how you study it, the interleaving, which is combining non-related topics, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then maybe even creating your own concept maps or writing your own questions or discussing it with a group. Things that weaken encoding be like poor sleep, lack of attention or motivation, talk about that, physical or mental stress, and then illness. Someone came in here with a gun and just started blasting up the room, even if they didn't shoot anybody, and then everybody all apologized, and that person went away, and then I was supposed to try to give the rest of this lecture. No one would have any clue what I'm talking about because you would all be very stressed. So same goes if you didn't sleep any last night. Same goes if this is boring and you don't want to listen to it, those type things. Consolidations, the converting the new memory into long-term storage, happens automatically, but you can weaken it. Generally, the worst way to weaken it is poor sleep. So if you sleep like a crappy person, it's going to be hard for you to consolidate memories. This is why we need to sleep good. The other things that worsen, basically, encoding also worsen consolidation. Retrieval, this is the act of recalling the memory. And every time you recall, it's re-encoded, reconsolidated, and it makes it more durable and also easier to recall the next time. So this is why retrieval practice, forced retrieval, recall practice is really where the bang for your buck is on learning. That's one reason why questions seem to work so good. We're going to talk about a little bit of other stuff. So stored memory, you have your stored strength. This is how durable the memory is. This increases with repeated reviews, and it does not decrease with time. So meaning that once you're exposed to like this lecture, you're encoding it, you're going to consolidate it, and it's going to be there in the background whether you ever pull it back up for memory or not. And it will only get better if you try to recall it over and over and over again. It only gets stronger. It doesn't really decrease. Now, the retrieval strength is what decreases with time. This is the thing. This is why you can't remember crap. You knew something once and now you don't know it anymore. The retrieval strength is low. And remember, you're really only as smart as what you can remember. So if you can't remember it, it is irrelevant. That's why retrieval strength is very important. And that's really why we need to focus there. Focus on the ability to retrieve what you have learned, which means you're going to have to review it, which means you're going to have to focus on recalling. It's not just reviewing it, looking at the paper again. It's actively trying to recall it without looking at the paper again. And again, we'll cover that a little bit more. So, again, this is combating the forgetting curve, and this is basically saying that over time we begin to forget things, and you forget things really quickly at first. See how steep this curve is, and then you're going to re-review it, and then it's a little bit slower the steep, and then you're going to re-review it, and then it's a little bit slower the steep, and then you re-review it, and it's a little bit slower the steep. So basically saying if you want to not forget anything, you have to basically review it frequently. At what rate do you need to review it? This is saying you review it at day 1, then you review it again at day 3, then you review it again at day 6. This is all irrelevant. Pick some review time, review things / forced recall of things on a frequent basis, and that will help you combat the forgetting curve. So some learning myths: reading, rereading, and highlighting are effective study habits. This is what's called the fluency illusion. This is kind of why I said you want to focus on recall of information, not just the reviewing of information. So let's say you have your chapter in your book and you read it, and you're like, that was kind of tough, but I think I got a pretty good handle on it. You didn't write any notes, you didn't do anything else, you just read it. 2 days later, you read it again, and you're like, yeah, man, I'm really starting to get this. I think I really understand what they're talking about. So what you just did was you fed into the fluency illusion. And the fluency illusion is that, because you've read it once and now you've read it again, and you feel like you have a better handle of the information, you actually haven't done anything except digest what is being given to you. And yes, on the second digestion, it is easier because you've done it once before. The thing that you need to do is practice recalling the information without the information. And then after you've practiced recalling it, then go back to the information and see where your gaps were, see what you left out, so that when you try to recall it again the second time, you can fill in those gaps. My example is, you say you have rheumatoid arthritis, and you're going to write down everything on one page that you know about rheumatoid arthritis, everything you can think of, how many joints, where the joints are, what joints more, what their lab values are, what their presenting symptoms are, what the diagnostic criteria is, how you treat it. Everything's going to go on this piece of paper. And you spend a lot of time creating this piece of paper. A day or two later, you're going to hide that piece of paper, and then you're going to try to recreate that piece of paper from memory. This is all going to be forced recall. So you're forcing yourself to recall all the information that you put on the piece of paper. After you've put everything on there that you can think of, you're then going to look at your piece of paper and see what you left out, and you're going to fill it in. A couple days later, you're going to then do that again. If you do that 2 or 3 times, you're going to know everything, at least on that piece of paper, about rheumatoid arthritis. So study one topic at a time. This is where interleaving, which I said studying multiple topics, is probably better than studying one topic at a time. It makes sense that if you just study cardiovascular stuff, you want to stay in the cardiovascular section. But what you actually want to do is you want to try to tie topics together, because that's how you make things stick. It's not tying one anchoring string to the knowledge that you're learning. It's tying 25 anchoring strings to the knowledge that you're learning. Like, when do you use steroids in cardiovascular disease, as well as in pulmonary disease, as well as in rheumatologic diseases? And if you can cross tie all that information, then the use of steroids for inflammatory immunologic processes seems to stick better than I use steroids for asthma, or I use steroids for rheumatoid arthritis. So those type of things. You're learning when to tie it all together, as opposed to just a one single incident scenario. So try to study multiple topics at one time. If you have a study day, let's say you've got 6 hours to study, maybe break it up into 2-hour blocks. You study cardio for 2 hours, rheum for 2 hours, and endocrine for 2 hours, something like that. Or you just try to focus on 2 different topics or 3 different topics. You get what I'm trying to say, I think. Studying the same place in the same time of day every single time, you study the exact same way, yada, yada, yada. Actually, you do a little bit better to kind of vary it up, mix it up, even if it's just move around your house, or move around the library, or go to places where distractions aren't so bad. Like, you don't want to go somewhere, you wouldn't want to try to study at a football game. That's too much distraction, right? But you might want to study at a coffee shop or in a library where there's people walking around, and then kind of keep you honest. There is something to be said for the random person that is not paying attention to you, but you envision them as paying attention to you, because that's what we all do. And you don't want them to think that you showed up for 15 minutes and opened your book and then closed your book and left. So basically saying, not studying alone in the dark place of your house in the exact same place every day. It's probably better to vary it a little bit. Some nuance to it, right? Study according to your learning style. So this was a big one, at least when I was growing up. It's like, are you an auditory learner, visual learner, this learner, that learner? All that kind of fell away. We're all visual learners, right? So we have, the 5 senses, right? You smell, taste, touch, sight. I don't know. There's another one that I'm missing. Anyway, there's the senses, right? So what are they? So there's sight, there's smell, there's taste, there's touch. Maybe there's got to be another one. You smell stuff, you taste stuff, you touch stuff, you see stuff. I don't know what the last one is. I'm struggling. Thankfully, this doesn't matter. So you have the senses. 90% of all of the processing of your senses goes to the sense of sight. So we are all visual learners. So you're like, oh, well, I learn better by listening to something. That's really a load of hock. You don't. You have all of your basically sensory neurons. 90% of them are governing sight. So you learn best by sight. So again, just it's irrelevant. What I'm getting at is just that don't think that you have a learning style and that you must stick to this particular learning style or you're not going to learn. That's all irrelevant. Just study the material, learn the material the best you can. Try to mix it up a little bit. That's the moral of the story. Listen to some stuff, watch some stuff, work some questions, read some stuff, those type of things. Cram before the exam doesn't really do you much good, especially a big exam that's like this that's covering multiple different topics. You can't really cram for it like you want. But when does cramming work? I like to always mention this just because cramming does help. And it helps mostly on single topic, mostly recall / definition exams. And the example here is high school. So this is why most of us learn really bad study habits in high school, because you can cram for all of those exams and absolutely crush them. You can make 100 and have no clue what you're talking about 2 hours after the test is over. And then that's why. So some learning truths. Forced recall. We've already mentioned this a little bit. Forced recall is a learning truth. That is the thing that you want to do after you study. You want to force yourself to recall it, and then you want to force yourself to recall it again. When you're driving down the road, just try to remember stuff about medicine. That's probably better than listening to a lecture if you can make yourself do it. It is hard. It is effortful. You feel uncomfortable, and it exhausts you after some time. But forced recall is a big learning truth. And then strength and encoding is another big learning truth. Here's some stuff on forced recall. This was a study that they did. So 2 different studies here. So this one, so you have the proportion of ideas that were recalled. This is a group that studied it one time, and then they asked them what they could recall. And you can see that they recalled about 10 to 20% of the stuff that they studied the one time. So then they practiced retrieval once. So they studied it one time, and then they practiced retrieval one time. And by practicing retrieval one time, you improve the proportion of stuff that you recalled by 50% or 100%. So you went from, let's say, 20% to almost 40%. So, or 15% to a little bit better than 30%. So they doubled how much they remembered just by practicing retrieval once. If you practice retrieval multiple times, you can see these people learn almost all of the information, 80 to 90% of the information. Just by practicing retrieval multiple times. This is another group or another study where they had 2 groups of people. So they first asked them the proportion of ideas that were recalled, and this is the judgment of their learning. So basically, and you can see that these numbers are drastically different, right? So this group, the S's, studied the material 4 times. So they studied the material 4 times, and then they were tested on it, and they remembered about 40% of what they had studied 4 times. When you asked them how they felt they were going to do, what they thought they knew, this group reported feeling like they knew the most. So they knew significantly more than the group that studied it once and practiced retrieval 3 times. But if you look, the group that practiced retrieval the most did the best. So they recalled 60% of the information. So practicing retrieval results in substantial improvements in your ability to recall information. That's number 1. Number 2, even if it doesn't make you feel as though you're going to do as well. But if you look at this, this is, 40% or something like that, and 48%. So these aren't big differences. Yes, this is higher than that, but it's not like it's huge. So moral of the story, forced recall, that's the way you do it. Strength and encoding. So how do we strengthen encoding? We've talked a little bit about this, but we're just going to beat it up one more time. So eat right, sleep, exercise, meditate, manage your stress. You also want to improve your motivation. This is like talking about values. This is your why. Why are you here? Why are you studying? Why are you trying to learn this crap? Know your why. That will really improve your motivation. The growth mindset. Remember, the fixed mindset is not the way to go. If you've got a fixed mindset, you need to go take that. You need to go destroy it. You need to blow it up with a gun. Make it a Coke can and go home and shoot it with a shotgun. Whatever you got to do to make it go away. Fixed mindset is not the way. You will limit yourself significantly if you run around life with a fixed mindset. Solution-oriented behavior. Focus on solving problems rather than the lack of productivity or time that you're having. So this is the one where you've got the study day and you're planning on studying, and then the washer breaks. And you got to devote, half your day to trying to fix the washer or whatever it is, or the leak. So it really sucks that happens, and it really sucked that ruined your study day. But you still got 2 hours at the end of the day, and you want to focus on getting something done in those 2 hours as opposed to the mullies of the busted washer or having to go get your car fixed or having to go do something else. So more solution-oriented behavior. Focus on the thing that you can affect change toward, not the thing that you can't affect change toward. And this is all of life. You need to be focusing on solution-oriented behavior. But we have a tendency to focus on the other, which is basically, I had a bad day. I didn't get as much done as I wanted. I didn't do this. That doesn't improve anything. That doesn't make anything better. And your outlook, again, stay positive. Positive mindsets, kind of improve our ability to, just look at things in a better manner, and it all helps strengthen coding. So again, vary your surroundings. We talked about that. You want to add interesting stories to the material, connect the material to real life, and make it emotional. So I told you one way I did this is if I had a real life story that resulted in a potential badness, when I would retell the story to help me remember it, as well as to maybe make it more memorable for the person I was telling to, I made the person die. So I told them that, we had this, and, the catheter went here, and it ended up in the mediastinum, and they died. And I was like, oh, golly, they died, So it lets you know that you should really know where your wire is when you go put the catheter in, something stupid like that. So, and again, try to tie the stuff that you're learning when you study to real life. So if you got a cardio patient, that you're taking care of that's heart failure, maybe go study heart failure when you get home. And then tie the heart failure to COPD, and then try to tie the COPD to some rheumatologic something. I don't know, make something diabetes back to heart failure. I don't know. Try to connect it to, once again, to other things that you're studying. Interleave that learning, make it emotional, and then make it an interesting story. And this is where we're going to talk about illness scripts in a little bit as well, which is basically the story of the disease. That's another way to kind of improve your ability to remember things. Concept maps. What's a concept map? This is a concept map. This just blows my mind. I can't do anything with that. I can do a little bit more with something like this as a concept map. I like pictures. I know this lecture has no pictures in it, which I apologize for, guys. But concept maps, generally with pictures, generally minimizing the data. Again, this is almost useless. May be helpful to make, but almost useless as using it as a study tool, because it's just too much. You can't remember all of this junk. I think this is some kind of nursing thing that I pulled anyway. But anyway, this is way more useful. It is much more succinct. This is kind of where we want to focus. Interleaving multiple topics. We talked about that several times now. Practicing recall. Talked about that several times. Those all things strengthen encoding. And remember your forgetting curve. This is just also it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically how confident we are in our ability to know something, and then how much we actually know. And what I'm getting at here is that early on, which this is usually like your intern year, you're at the peak of Mount Stupid, which is where you think you know stuff because you've got the vocabulary, the basics, and you've started to practice it, and you're quite encouraged, and you're like, yeah, I got this, I know everything. And then slowly, as more and more material comes in, you realize that, wow, this is way trickier and harder, and then you get down here and dumb. I don't know how this ties into my talk. I don't know if I can use any of this. The goal is to get to unconscious competence, but I don't know. I don't think that this fits. Yeah, let's take these two slides out. All right, so we're still on. We're still on learning strategies. So next we are going to get into some study tips. So we're still under learning strategy, but study tips. Some general study tips is just starting early. More time spent usually results in better scores. Generally, not always, but generally. Know what you're good at and what you're not good at. This is kind of knowing your weak areas. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. Making connections between material. This is kind of the interleaving process again, but just in a different light. test your knowledge frequently. This is where, practice tests as well as question banks come in, or just a blank sheet of paper where you're forcing recall. Leverage different approaches. This is where you've got the audio, the video, the book, the questions, and you're kind of smashing it all together so that you get hit from it from multiple different angles. And then study with a partner group. This is just having someone to talk to, generally to talk about stuff. This could technically be your dog. It could also be your wall or your chair or your bed. It doesn't actually have to be another person. It helps if it's another person because they can listen to what you're saying and then call you on your BS. When you start talking about hypertension and you don't have a clue what you're talking about, they can tell you, hey man, I don't think you know that too well. While your dog won't be able to do anything, but he'll probably listen intently, or she, and they would love a treat. So, and a petting. But so set a goal. That's probably another good study tip. Just want to set a goal. You want a finite goal, not I want to do better. You need a number, and you need a date. So you need a number and a date, and then you need to say, how am I going to achieve that? It's not just the act of setting a number. It's number one, how are you going to do it? Number two, what is it going to be? And you want as specific as humanly possible. And then you need to have a plan as to how you're going to achieve it. And you need to have your benchmarks along the way so that you know that you're meeting your goal, you're going towards your goal, and that you can hit reset if you're not meeting your goal, you're not approaching your goal. And I did this through practice test. I think, at least when I was studying for step 2, I think I took like 13 or 14 practice tests. I took like one a month again, and I wanted to see consistent improvement. I remember I got about 6 months in and I kind of plateaued, so I had 2 or 3 tests in a row that were like the same test score. And that's when I realized I had to change something. And then I'll tell y'all what I added later, but what I added was an approach to questions that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Again, for most of the stuff, there's no secret ingredient, but there is time. This guy didn't get jacked out of his mind by working out for 2 weeks right before the test, right before his fitness show. He did it for years and years and years and years. You're not going to learn everything for this test in 2 weeks right before the test where you can cram for it. This lady didn't get a little overweight in 2 weeks. This is a lifestyle habit. This is a lifestyle habit. Learning all of this information is a lifestyle habit. You got to have it. Compound your time. A little studying every day or most days of the week is way more beneficial than cramathons on the weekend. This is like if you're a first-year resident here, your test is going to be in 2024. It's March 1st is what I said. March 1st, I don't know why. So I said from March 1st to the test is 902 days away. Days away. So this is how many days away your exam is from March, the March 1st date. I know it's February, so I got my timeline off a little bit. But we'll say it's March 1st. So from March 1st to now, or to your test date, if you're a first-year resident and you work 5 questions a day, by the time you show up to the exam, you'll have worked 4,500 questions. That's just working 5 questions a day. That's not that hard. How many questions is 4,500? That's like 2.5 question banks from top to finish, top to back to front, however you want to say it. That's a lot of questions. If you're a second-year resident, you can see how the number drops substantially just by taking out that extra year. Same goes if you're a third-year resident. If you're a third-year resident and you haven't studied any yet, this might be concerning. So you're going to need to do more than 5 questions a day. 860 questions probably isn't going to cut it. Probably going to need to do more than that. Unless you're just like you've crushed all of the exams up to this point. Your baseline knowledge is just phenomenal. But this would be a little concerning. 5 questions a day probably wouldn't be enough. Assuming that you're what I call a normal person. You probably want to get somewhere in the 1,000, 1,200 to 2,000 range. Would probably be a little bit better target to shoot for. But you could see how you will easily get there just with 5 questions a day. And this is no 1 month cram session before the test like everybody does. This is the average amount of retention of a material 3 days after you have participated in said thing. So this is a lecture. This is 5%. So in 3 days, y'all are going to remember about 5% of what I said. That's phenomenal. That's nothing. So lectures aren't worth much. Reading. This is why reading and rereading, that fluency illusion, is bad. Reading something, you only remember 10% in 3 days. And then you read it again, and then you feel like you know more than you actually know. This is where audio-visual, you see a little bit better than that. Demonstration, discussion, practicing, teaching others. This is where, board exam question writing, working gets kind of down in here. This practicing, teaching others, talking about things in groups, teaching it to your dog is way better. It's way more bang for your buck. Now, it's way more effortful. It's way harder. It requires you to pull everything to the front of your mind and make yourself talk about it. That's why I am giving this fake lecture to the computer screen and to no one before I actually go give it to the group. Because this is very effortful. This is hard for me to do. My resting heart rate is probably 1.5 million right now because I'm having to talk constantly. It's going to make my voice sore. I'm having to pull all of this information, kind of from the depths of my mind forward and then cast it out so that hopefully it's in a reasonable order and manner. Main moral of the story is you want to focus down here in this teaching others, practicing, and discussion because you get way more bang for your buck than you do up here and listening to a lecture, reading something, or watching a video. So I think that makes sense, right? The testing effect, if you just worked questions and you didn't do anything else and you didn't even really review the questions, you maybe read the main point, you get about a 1 to 4% score improvement, percent correct improvement per 1,000 questions worked. This information is taken from, I think, USMLE Step 1 data, because that's where most of the kind of studies on this stuff are done. And this are definitely results vary here, right? So early on, you might get the closer to 4% per 1,000, but later on, you're going to get closer to the 1% per 1,000. But you can see here that, so let's say you only work 3,000 questions. So that's going to give you anywhere from 12 to 3% correct improvement. So that's not that much, right? Unless you hit the 12 mark, then you're doing pretty good. But what I'm getting at is that you improve by working questions, you improve by the testing effect, but you gotta pay attention to what you're doing, just because if you just randomly pile through 10,000 questions, that may only bump you from 55% correct to 65% correct if you just floated through the questions with no rhyme or reason to what you were doing. Hope that makes sense. Fasting or sugar and learning, this kind of gets back to the don't eat sugar statement that I had right before. You did it. This is a rat study, so I know this is terrible, but this is improvements in memory score versus fasting insulin levels. And what you will learn is that the lower the fasting insulin level, the more the rats learned, than the higher the fasting insulin level. So in one group, they took rats that were fasting. In another group, they took rats that they fed sugar. And if you feed a rat a bunch of sugar, it is very unmotivated. And we're all animals, humans with insulin and all that kind of fun jazz. If you are fat and happy before you go sit into this test or before you go study, or if you study with a bowl of Skittles, you're likely to remember less than if you studied fasting. And this is one, I kind of liked the intermittent fasting thing while I was trying to go on these big study-a-thons. I'd wake up in the morning, maybe eat a little bit of something kind of early or not eat anything at all, and then just try to study long and hard most of the day without eating much, drinking some things, but not without eating much. And, those sugary energy drinks probably aren't great for you, number one, because they give you way too much caffeine, which I take way too much caffeine anyway, so I'm a little bit of a hypocritical statement there, but way too much caffeine, and then on top of that, way too much sugar, too many calories. Also, it makes you fat, it makes you feel sluggish. It's not a part of a healthy diet. It's not a part of being fit and all those other kind of things. So, thinking of related topics. So, this is whenever you get to that point in the test that you're like, hey, I need to try to remember this thing, but I can't remember it. An example here is, what does rhabdo do to calcium? So, what happens to calcium levels whenever someone's in rhabdo? Does anybody know the answer off the top of their head? Okay, you didn't know it. That's okay. So, the way I would say get there is, well, what does rhabdo do? Well, rhabdo is a breakdown of muscles. It causes acute kidney injury, and it leads to increased potassium. It also leads to increased phosphate. So we all know that rhabdo breaks down muscles, and we all know that breakdown muscles causes acute kidney injury. We all know with acute kidney injury, you often increase potassium. Also, inside those muscle cells, there's potassium and there's phosphate, and those are both going to increase. So all of that then leads to, Well, what does phosphate do to calcium? Well, it binds to phosphate and it deposits in tissue. So calcium and phosphate, when they're together high in the serum, they bind together and then it deposits in the tissue. So we know the phosphate is high, we know the potassium is high, but what happens to that calcium? Well, it's going to bind to that phosphate and it's going to deposit in tissue. So the calcium levels in rhabdo are decreased. So this is thinking of related topics to try to help you remember the thing that you needed to remember, which was associated with AKI and the potassium and the phosphate, and you kind of walked yourself all down that line to get to where you wanted to get. What is this? I'll read that in a second. Compare and contrast material. This also helps you learn. This is basically, you're trying to learn nephritic versus nephrotic syndrome. You want to know which one causes edema, which one doesn't, because your questions and your answer choices are going to stem around being able to compare and contrast this material. So this is why you want to know the differences between the two things. So know the difference between nephritic, know the difference between nephrotic. When you're studying, learn them as two separate things. Be able to compare and contrast them together so that you can tell. Same goes for like primary biliary cirrhosis versus primary sclerosing cholangitis. So primary sclerosing cholangitis is males. They both get the pruritus. This one has the beaded appearance on the ERCP. This one has the anti-mitochondrial antibodies. This one's associated with other rheumatologic things. This one's associated with ulcerative colitis. So primary sclerosing cholangitis associated with ulcerative colitis. Primary biliary cholangitis is females, anti-mitochondrial antibodies, and Sjogren's. So whenever you're learning these two things, you want to learn them together because that's how they're going to ask the questions. They're going to want you to be able to differentiate between the two things. And if you can't differentiate between the two things, then you're going to miss that question. Illness scripts, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Giving it a story. So someone tell me the story of acute coronary syndrome. You, go. Acute coronary syndrome. Tell me the story. Yeah, that was tough, I know. I didn't make this very interactive. I probably should have made it a little more interactive. So it's hard for you to tell me the story because I'm putting you on the spot and all that kind of fun stuff. But what's the story? So it's your hypertensive diabetic with that smokes, that has claudication type symptoms already, that has the arterial little ulcers on his legs, and he's kind of got that ruddy red appearance, and he's maybe a little overweight, or maybe he's not. That comes in with substernal crushing chest pain that's made him nauseated. He's puked, he's sweating, he's diaphoretic. You get the EKG, you see the ST elevations, you get the troponin, it's elevated. You call your cardiologist, and he goes, "Ooh, this looks bad." They take him to the cath lab, they put in a stent, they put him on aspirin and some other antiplatelet and yada 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 yada. So that's the story. That's the illness script. Try to learn things as stories or illness scripts because they're easier to remember. It's easier for you to remember a story than it is to remember a list of facts. And you can see in that acute coronary syndrome illness script, you can easily tie in the associated diseases like CKD or diabetes or smoking or hyperlipidemia. You can see how in that story, that illness script that you create, it helps you remember those things. The other thing is when you're working questions and you get down to answer choices, especially on diagnosis questions, does the diagnosis that you're about to pick as your answer present like the story that is written above in the presentation? So if you're about to pick, granulomatosis with polyangiitis. So that's the answer that you're about to pick. And you're looking at it and you're like, I'm between that one and eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis. That's tough because those kind of sound a little bit alike, or they present a little bit alike, right? Well, tell yourself the story or the illness script for Wegener's or granulomatosis with polyangiitis, and does that fit with the stem or the presentation above? If it does, then you probably got the right answer. If it doesn't, you might need to reassess. And is this what they are presenting here? Oh yeah, this is basically just saying that does the illness script that you're telling yourself of aortic dissection fit for the diagnosis that is being asked in the question? So commonly tested groups. This kind of gets back to the compare and contrast again. Subarachnoid hemorrhage versus meningitis. Those things are commonly asked together. Sometimes asked together as diagnosis is meningitis either being fungal, bacterial, viral, or TB. All those things are kind of commonly tested together. So you want to learn them together. You want to be able to compare and contrast between those two groups so that you can get that right. Autoimmune hepatitis, primary sclerosing cholangitis, primary biliary cholangitis. You want to be able to know those things together because they're commonly tested together, right? So autoimmune hepatitis, what is that? That's the one where you get the elevated LFTs, usually in a female, and it's got the Oh, what's that autoantibody for autoimmune hepatitis? Is it mitochondrial? Or is that this one? Nope. Mitochondrial is this one. What is the autoimmune hepatitis autoantibody? Autoantibody autoimmune hepatitis. Let's see what that is. Is it liver kidney microsomal? Is that it? I'm kind of surprised it didn't just pop up automatically. The liver kidney microsomal. There's another one. Anti-smooth muscle. That's not what we wanted. Ooh, that's a lot. Let me just go to images. That always helps. Autoimmune liver kidney microsomal. Smooth muscle. That's smooth muscle, huh? Yeah, smooth muscle. Yeah, smooth muscle. So, autoimmune hepatitis is your liver kidney microsomal antibodies, anti-liver kidney microsomal, your anti-smooth muscle antibodies, your primary sclerosing cholangitis. That is your associated with ulcerative colitis, beaded appearance, dudes. And then your primary biliary cirrhosis is your anti-mitochondrial antibody, ladies, other autoimmune stuff. Okay, I have to review that a couple more times. Breaks off. Test taking tips. I think this is going to be the dividing line. So at least I think that's what I wanted my dividing line to be. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully I can go through this second half a little bit faster. There's also a good bit in there that I just kind of doubled up on. All right, days off, breaks, starting cold. It's good to take days off. You need days off for de-stressing. You need breaks for de-stressing. The kicker here is that, especially if you're in like an intense study period, don't take 5 days off in a row. You lose a lot in that 5 days. You want to kind of keep stuff coming in. You want to keep reviewing material, those type things. The other comment to this is starting cold. Generally speaking, the worst percent correct of the questions that we're going to work are like the first 20. So my general statement to that is that you don't want the first 20 questions that you've worked that day to be the first 20 questions of the test, because that's probably going to mean that you're going to do worse on those 20 than all the other 20s, sets of 20 throughout the day. So my suggestion is, just like marathon runners run miles before they go start the marathon to get warm, just like sprinters sprint multiple times to get warm before they actually run their sprint. Just like Michael Phelps, before he would go swim, before his Olympic meets, he would get in a side pool and swim for 45 minutes, which would be a full day's workout, and it would kill me before he would do that. Just like that, you want to make sure the brain is greased and ready to go when you walk into the test. So maybe wake up 30 minutes early and pound through some questions. You don't have to do well. Don't freak yourself out. You're going to miss a few. And if missing a few early in the morning before that exam is going to freak you out so bad that you can't take the test, then sure, don't do that. But if you're not the type of person that gets so anxious you can't see straight when you miss a question, then I would suggest trying to grease the brain up before you go sit down. And the same goes for breaks and days off. This is also where the Netflix binge 2 days before your exam, because you're de-stressing, is probably not worth it. You're not improving your chances of doing well on the test if all you did was watch Twilight on Netflix for the 48 hours before, sat around and ate junk food on your couch. You didn't help yourself out any there. What should you have done? Slept well, maybe reviewed a little, not had any stressful studying, not really trying to learn any new material, just kind of a light review, practicing some recall. exercising a little bit. That's what you should have done the last 2 days before your test. But anyway, neither here nor there. All right, last thing is getting into test taking tips. This is where the division line for lecture 1 and lecture 2 is going to be. I am a little bit more than halfway. I bet I could combine some of these to try to decrease it, because this I could probably speed that up a little bit. But there was some stuff in here that I definitely kind of double hit. So